What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of What the Fuck Do You Do? I'm your co-host, Trey Bebe. We got T Foxy Trav, Justin Jawong Dong.
What's up?
And we are joined by a very special guest. She's a Hall of Famer guest, honestly.
Oh my god.
She still holds the highest viewed episode in our podcast history. Until today. We're going to try and beat that. But Diane, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a lot of pressure to compete against yourself. I'm not gonna lie. I have a feeling like I need to beat the original podcast. So
you're the only winner
hoping.
in this equation.
That's true. But I think it would hurt me if my podcast about being an account executive beats out this one. But
we'll just have, every time you get a promotion, every time you have a different life stage,
bring you
back on.
Okay.
We have to show that 2024 Diane is better than 2020 Diane.
Yes, but what if it's not?
What do you think the difference between 2024 and 2020 Diane is?
Oh my god.
I'm just putting you on the spot.
Getting right into it.
Biden versus Trump.
I feel like I have some more health problems now. I feel like I'm a little wiser in terms of like career, much better boundaries. Yeah.
Are you still an account executive?
I am still an account executive. But now I'm a senior account executive.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right,
Maybe we
let's
should just
pivot,
talk about account executive again.
Senior account executive.
Yeah. Upgraded. Version 2. The sequel.
But yeah, welcome back to the pod. Last time you were on here, I wasn't here.
I know, I actually was on it before you were even part of this.
That's true.
Yeah, but it only took off.
She just sunned you.
It didn't it took off with my episode.
It did take off with your episode.
Yeah.
And every time I look at the back end numbers, I'm like,
Well, welcome to the podcast.
so I'm happy to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I do feel like you're the biggest supporter of the pod behind the scenes over the past 4 years. So this is huge.
I did write an Apple podcast review.
Did you really?
Yeah, it's 5 stars, obviously. I don't think anyone acknowledged it, so.
We actually can't see them, I don't think. Or
I don't know.
I like how you're like, you're our biggest supporter. And she's like, yeah, I wrote you a review.
Yeah.
Of course I am.
It would have been really bad if you wrote a 4-star review.
Somebody did, because we're 4.9 on Spotify.
Can we also talk about, do you ever see those people who write like a glowing recommendation, like this restaurant was amazing, the service was awesome, the food was great, 4 stars out of 5. It's like, what was, you said nothing wrong, so why did you give a perfect review?
They gotta save the 5 stars.
Yeah.
I also really dislike the people that rate restaurants and then they say they've never been. So they'll be like, 3 stars, couldn't get in, busy Saturday night. It's like, that's not their fault.
I hate Yelp.
That was our first job.
Yeah.
You just described our entire first job.
Yeah. Trauma. Yeah.
Long time ago.
PTSD.
Didn't think we would be doing a egg freezing podcast back then.
We've come a long way.
We really have come a long way.
Yeah.
Back to the kids at Yelp, you know.
Speaking of kids.
Speaking
of kids, the topic for today is what the fuck do you do if you're freezing eggs?
Yeah.
Diane.
Yeah.
We have no idea what this is about, so could you just give us a little context before we get into the actual topic?
Yes.
Maybe about you and Justin, since you guys are together, a couple, and what was kind of the basis for this whole freezing eggs?
Yes. Well, can I just say I'm very proud of you guys for talking about this or allowing me to talk about this, because I do find that it's a popular topic right now, being a 30-year-old female in New York, where it's a city where people have kids late. I don't think it's as popular of a topic amongst males because it's something that you don't have to consider as much unless you're with a partner that's probably talking about it. So shout out you guys for discussing it as a male-hosted podcast.
We're the good ones.
You are. Okay, so for context, I think that on the topic of egg freezing, I started looking into it when I was 27, so 3 years ago. And it was for a few reasons, namely, one, at the time, I was dealing with some health issues that could impact my fertility long term. Because of that, I was like, let me look at alternatives or just how I can ensure that I'm setting my future self up for success, which is why I looked into egg freezing when I was fairly young. 2, I was working at a company at the time that would pay for this process in whole, which we can talk about the financial part later, but egg freezing is considered an elective process. It's very expensive to pay out of pocket. Typically, it's around 10 to 20 grand if you're just doing one round.
Ooh, that's crazy.
Yes, it's really expensive. So knowing that my company would cover it, that's another reason. And then I think the third reason is at that time, we weren't engaged yet, but being in, a long-term partnership and knowing that we would eventually get married. Like, I wasn't someone who always knew I wanted kids. I still don't have like a strict timeline, but I was with someone I was like, wow, Justin would be a great dad one day. And I wanted to give us the option too.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think? Anything you thought?
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, guys don't know anything about egg freezing. We know that it exists, but I would say like 98, 99% of guys don't know what it entails, why women do it, how it works. So it's like completely new to us, and it was new to me. So when you were telling me that back at 27, I was just like, right, cool. Yeah. Like, let me know how I can help.
Yeah.
But yeah, as we've gone on this journey, I've just learned so much by proxy.
Yeah.
And it is kind of scary how much is involved, and I'm sure we'll get into it.
Well, here's the thing. A lot of women also don't know that much about egg freezing, which is why I'm excited we're talking about it. I think when you're in your 30s, the narrative becomes a lot stronger about like preserving your fertility, and there's a lot of social messaging for women when you're like 30. You're like your timeline is I shouldn't be snapping, but your timeline is rapidly approaching in terms of like having to plan for children. But when you're in your 20s, people don't really teach you this. It's not something they teach in like sex ed class. I wish they did. So I think as a female, and for all the female listeners, even if you are as young as 25, it is not too early to start looking at the stuff.
Wow.
Yeah.
You hit on an interesting point because, one of the things I was thinking about prepping for this episode is like what I learned in health and sex ed class and what I didn't.
Yeah.
And the what I didn't category is like way larger than the 4 things I feel like we actually did learn.
Yeah.
So once you kind of became aware of it, how did you educate yourself? Like, what resources did you gather? Did you go to doctors to learn more? Like, what was the process of learning whether it was right for you?
Honestly, podcasts.
Really?
Like, wow. Yes. Because there's something about when you're, this is my assumption, I'm not in the medical field, obviously. Shout out my first account executive episode, but I'm not a doctor. But what I imagine is when you're a fertility doctor, you're dealing with a lot of different patients with a lot of different needs. Egg freezing is just one of them. So my experience with doctors is when I would ask them about it, they would give me the high level version of like what egg freezing is, but I wanted to know, what are the side effects? What's the emotional toll that is going to happen? What are maybe the supplements that I have to take? What are the alternative options outside of egg freezing? Is there anything natural? Maybe this isn't a route I want to take. Whereas doctors, I think, typically probably would recommend it because they do make money off of this process. So podcasts were probably my number one source of getting to hear other women's experiences and the things that they're like, these are the things I wish I knew. So that, and then obviously then working with a clinic. And then I think the third thing was just like, I mean, I'm embarrassed to admit this, but like Reddit threads, online, Dr. Google, and seeing what people were saying online. Yeah.
And were they in these podcasts, were they going through like the biology of it, or was it just more of like a, hey, I had a great experience and this is like what you would expect outcome wise? Like how in depth do they go?
Pretty much more the latter in terms of like, this was my experience.
Yeah.
I did also listen to a lot of podcasts with fertility doctors that was like, these are the tests that you should do. This is the blood work markers you should do. These are the medications that you could be taking. Because I wanted to empower myself with as much knowledge as I could before even going into the appointment. So a little bit of both, but what was more helpful was truly the latter part of, this is what happened. This crazy side effect happened. Like, this was how my mood was. This was my result. I think that eased me in a lot. Like, that eased me into the process because I was like, okay, this person is around the same age as me. They're in the same life stage as me. This was their experience, and made it feel like kind of a more approachable process to go into versus just like a medical procedure. Does that make sense?
You were doing all of this before you decided whether or not you wanted to do it. You were reading Reddit, doing all of that.
Yeah.
Was there a specific moment where you're like, okay, it's time. Like, I've read enough. I have a good enough idea. Like, what made you want to start that process, I guess?
For me, it was truly because my company would pay for it. And I remember telling you, I was like, I didn't know how long I'd be at this company. I'm not even there anymore. But because I knew how much it would be out of pocket and I knew that I was in a good age, I was like, I got to get this done ASAP. So it was really the company benefit. And through podcasts and doing my own research, I found out that a woman's fertility, on average, it's typically best in terms of your egg quality and quantity when you are in your mid-20s, like 25 to 29. A woman is born with like a finite amount of eggs, so you are born with as many eggs as you'll ever have. And then there is a really steep decline once you do hit your mid-30s, again, on average. So I was like, great, I'm 27 right now. Let me do this in the next few years. So I'm kind of freezing my eggs when they are at the best quality and then not having to worry about it when I'm in my mid-30s.
What is that, like, even before getting into the freezing eggs, like this sort of biological clock?
Yeah.
Like, what, I mean, that's something I think we just would not really understand because, like, if we turn 30, we just turn 30.
Mm-hmm.
We did a whole episode about turning 30.
Right.
Fertility had nothing to do with our planning.
This didn't come up.
We were like, my body hurts a little bit more. I want to play more golf, you know?
I'm sore.
That also happens.
But as a girl, like, as you're getting into 30s and whatnot, you have to think about these things. Like, how do you deal with, like, knowing all of that? Like, that's a lot of information to just, like, try and withstand on a day-to-day basis.
Totally.
Yeah.
That's heavy. Yeah.
Totally. And I think, like, this is a deeper conversation that goes outside of just egg freezing and fertility, but I think women get a lot of a lot of social media and just society messaging. It changes when you turn 30 when you're a female.
Yeah.
It's not just about fertility, but it's about where you should be in life. Should you be a mom at this point? Should you be married? You should probably be settled down. I'm not a male, but I would imagine that men get probably a different amount of pressure, and the pressure is different. It's probably like things like being a caretaker and things like that. But anyway, there's a lot of messaging that females get when they turn 30, and fertility is just one thing. To your point, I think it is really loaded because it feels like this ticking time bomb where you're like, I have to act quick. But there is pressure because, let's say, your company doesn't pay for it, which is the vast majority of women. Most women are like, I'm not ready to have a baby. I'm focused on my career, or I'm single right now, or I just don't want to right now. But I know that I want the option down the line. Let me do it. But, oh, wait, I might not have 20 grand to spend on this. Or I might not have, the emotional capacity to deal with all the medications that this process then has to entail. So I do think it's a lot. And I think why it's important to do this research and this evaluation in the beginning is to decide if this process is right for you. I don't think it's right for everyone. Mm-hmm. I think it's still a luxury right now. It shouldn't be. I wish we lived in a world where this could be a procedure that all women have access to, but it's just not. And then from a health perspective, you're putting your body through a lot of hormones, and we can get into like the actual process and what that looks like. But that is also a mental hurdle that you have to get past. So with all that said, yeah, it's really loaded. It's a lot to think about. And there's women that go through it not just once, but I know women that have gone through it 5+ times. And not only is that a financial burden, but that's a burden on your body. But sometimes it's your only option if you want to have kids. So to answer your question, yeah, it's a lot.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, logistically, like, I think one of the questions that I've seen when I've talked about this is just like, where do you even get started? I'm curious, like, it might be a boring question, but from an educational perspective, like, when you were getting reimbursed by like your company and going through insurance, like, how did you actually set that up? Like, what's your process to figure out if you can do the procedure, how to make sure it's paid for?
Yeah.
Like, that's always the biggest hurdle for me is like, I'm too scared to even look at my insurance coverage policy for stuff. And I don't even go to the dentist enough based on like what I'm allotted, you know?
No, totally. I think, so first it'll depend. If you have this insurance, great. And that's something that's probably done. A lot of big companies are now offering it, but not all. If you are looking into this process and your company offers it, absolutely the first step you should take is talk to that insurance carrier, see what they'll cover, and then work with the clinics and the labs that they cover. Because, for example, my insurance doesn't work with most clinics in New York. So they gave me a list of who to reach out to. Now, that aside, whether you have insurance or you don't, the process is typically, after you've done your research, is to choose a clinic. I have a few friends that are going through this right now, and they're kind of shopping amongst 3 to 5 clinics to see, hey, like, what are the costs? Because the costs associated at clinics can be different.
Oh, wow. Is that just quality? Is it like prestige? Like, what would make a difference, do you think?
Good question. I don't know the answer, but I would imagine it's quality of care, but it's also like the cost is probably negligible.
The difference?
Yeah, the difference. I think it's probably comes down to like quality, doctor availability, the pharmacies they're attached to.
Interesting.
Maybe what you're doing too.
Yeah. I would definitely recommend looking at least at 2 clinics just to see, ask your right questions, do the right research, and then from there, once you've selected a clinic, you don't have to commit to egg freezing right away. You will be allowed to first do the first step of egg freezing or IVF or embryo freezing, whatever process you choose. The first step is a round of these fertility tests. And I recommend, like, anyone who's listening who's evaluating it, before you even commit to the whole process, you can just get the fertility test done, because all of that is lab work and blood work that can actually help determine how fertile you are as a female, what your egg count looks like, what that quality looks like. And depending on that, you might not need to do this process right away, but it also might be a good indicator of like, oh, my quality's down, my quantity is down, I should get this done. So that can be like a good first measurement before committing to the whole procedure.
Nice.
Yeah.
What is the process? And like, can you just explain it like from start to finish, like what you did and like what it all entails?
Yeah.
All I know is freezing eggs.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I have a really weird. Okay. When you think about what is your mental?
I want to know what you guys think.
I think about something getting extracted, and then they put it in some sort of like petri dish, and then they freeze it.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I mean,
okay.
I was thinking about those little tubes, like the little and then it's got a little. I don't know what they look like. It's not a grocery store egg. It can't be that big. And then it's just in like one of those freezers that when you open the door, like the cold air is visible, you know?
Or it's like Alien where it just...
I probably would have done it if it was that.
Do that again.
That needs to be a clip. I'm actually curious, before I answer that, like, when is the first time you guys heard about egg freezing in general? Like, as a male, I'm just...
Like the term?
The term, yeah.
I feel like I've heard about it in, like, passing or pop culture, but the first time I actually really heard about it was my cousin, who is in her... I think she's 40 now, but while she was in her late 30s, she had always wanted to be a mom and really wanted to have kids, but she never found a romantic partner that was going to, like, help her start a family and be the right person. And she went through, I guess it's IVF, like, where you bring in a donor multiple times, and it's just been a really long process, expensive, long, frustrating process where she's trying to kind of capture the last, like, 5 years of her 30s, I guess. And so I've, like, talked to her just about how I guess it just feels like a sometimes disheartening process and, like, painful and tough. And that was, like, the first time I actually really heard somebody who had gone through it.
Yeah.
Before then, and that was a couple of years ago. And before then, I don't think I'd ever met somebody who at least had talked about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I heard it maybe, like, when I started working. I actually remember they didn't talk about it, like, egg freezing, but it was, like, on Friends. They couldn't get pregnant. So they were talking about, like, what do we do now?
That's right.
And it was like, we could either have, like, a donor, we could adopt.
The one where they egg freeze?
Yeah. But I remember, I watched this like a teenager, so it didn't, like, resonate like this. I guess, heaviness of like the decision making.
Yeah.
But that's, I guess, where I started at least getting the ideas of like, oh, there's like other ways of having a family.
Totally. I'm really glad you even brought that up, because I think one thing that people don't talk about with egg freezing, at least in my experience, is how emotional and taxing it can be, and how no results are guaranteed. It's so different person to person. Like, you can have drastically different experiences. So I'm glad you're saying that, because I think it's wonderful that we have the technology to make this a possibility for women, but I also think it needs to be commented on, like, how sad, isolating, and lonely this process can be too, especially if you're going at it alone. I think I was really lucky to have Justin emotionally just be there and be my emotional well, you had to be like my emotional punching bag a little bit. I'm sorry. But yeah, I think it's...
Probably shouldn't call her crazy.
Yeah, do we want to talk about that?
You weren't crazy. You were acting crazy.
Nice.
Oh.
Had a second chance to really change it, but
Well, now it's all recorded. No, let's keep that. Let's keep that. To answer your question about the process, I will give like the high level version. So when you go to the clinic, the first thing that they'll do is blood work and lab work, which is basically there to assess a couple of things. It's to do a hormonal assessment and a fertility assessment to basically see if you're a good candidate for this process. And what I like about it is, again, you could be pleasantly surprised and maybe, hey, I have good egg quality and good, like, decent numbers where maybe I don't have to do it right now, but it can also be a good test to be like, hey, this is something I need to act on because my numbers are going down.
What does the hormonal test indicate?
Yeah, so it will look at, the one I did was a full panel hormonal test where it showed me like all hormone levels, but the one they key on is something called your AMH. And that, I believe, again, not a doctor, is one of the hormones that is basically the fertility hormone and can help you understand how fertile you are.
Got it.
So they look at that, and they're also able to take an ultrasound, which gives you a follicle count of how many eggs potentially are we dealing with. Again, I don't know if I'm using the right terms, but between those tests, it'll help determine if you're a good candidate.
So AMH, if I understand it right, is like the hormone that catalyzes egg production, or...
I don't know if it catalyzes egg production, but it is an indicator of your overall fertility, I believe. Please Google that if anyone's listening. And if a doctor's listening, I'm so sorry because I'm probably butchering this. But that is what they look at. And... Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, y'all also did like a bunch of genetics tests, I think, too, or different?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's part of like, if you decide, part of the process is like, because everyone's different, you need to decide if you want to freeze your eggs or if you want to freeze an embryo.
Yeah.
An embryo being like a fertilized egg with a partner.
Yep.
So we did it, and we had conversations on what we wanted to do, and we ended up wanting to freeze embryos. So an additive part of that first portion was a genetic panel screening. So they will take vials of blood from each of us and make sure that there are no genetic, like mutual genetic abnormalities that are shared between the two people.
Like cancer risk or diabetes.
Yeah, or like something like Down syndrome is something I think that they can identify early, something like that. Again, not a doctor as well, but it is a preliminary check to make sure both partners don't have something awful before you start.
Yeah. So that is something you typically do if you do embryo freezing, and if you're doing this with a partner, it's just nice to get that temperature check. From there, basically the process starts in the terms of, they typically, if you're obviously a female doing this, they typically want to start you on day 2 or day 3 of your period of your cycle. I think something to do with like where your hormones are at. And the process starts by doing these subcutaneous injections, which are injections that you inject yourself, usually in like the abdominal area. They'll ship you the medications beforehand, and they'll tell you exactly what dosages to do. And these medications are in the form of, again, like needles. And typically you inject yourself with one type of medication in the morning and then one at night. And that process happens from 10 to 14 days. Within that 10 to 14 days, you are going to the clinic usually every 2 days to do blood work and to do ultrasounds to make sure that your body is responding to the medication. And when you do go in for those tests, your doctor will look at your blood work and adjust the medications as you need. The nurse will call you being like, hey, up this dosage, lower this dosage, etc., throughout these 2 weeks. Now, towards the end, you'll start going to the clinic every single day. And then typically by day 10 to 14 is when you're ready for this process, and you'll do something called the trigger shot. And it's a special type of medication that you do inject to yourself. And what that does to your body is it basically releases the eggs that your body has been forming in these in this entire process.
Yeah, they're growing over these 10 to 14
Yes.
days. The trigger shot releases them?
Yes, and that happens in 36 hours. So once you do it, you have to do it at a specific time. Your procedure is in 36 hours after that. You have to time it correctly. And then in that 36 hours, you go and you get your eggs sucked out of you.
Sounds like you have to be very disciplined.
That's
this
so
whole
much.
process.
I can't even take vitamins twice a day. You have to that takes over your whole life.
It's more shots than I've ever seen, and I think it's absolutely absurd that these clinics expect their patients to be able to give themselves this many shots without any kind of training or supervision. I would watch you do it, and I'm like, baby, this is a lot of shots. This is intense.
Yeah, I think it was intense, especially the first day, because not only are you injecting yourself with medication, there's a mental block that happens in your brain when you give yourself a shot, because it's almost like our bodies are hardwired to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
So there's something weird about you're the person administering a shot in you. Yeah. Whereas when you go get a flu shot or a vaccine or whatever, someone injecting it in to you it makes it easy. Yeah. It's really not the pain. It's the mental block of you taking that shot and watching yourself do that.
It's like you're hurting yourself.
Exactly. So that was odd. And I'll also say, I won't mention the clinic I went to, but they weren't the most helpful in terms of telling me what medications, how to administer it. So YouTube was a big...
how to give yourself... Oh my gosh.
I will say YouTube. Shout out YouTube.
Wow. It's scary because some of those needles are giant.
Yeah. It was not my favorite part of the procedure.
You got really good at it, though.
Yeah. You do get past it, I think, by day 3, because you're I have to do this.
Yeah.
And you're doing it twice a day. And yeah.
What did it feel like for you, during that 10 to 14 day period? I was there, but
how did it feel for you?
I was just mesmerized and advances in modern science.
Good answer.
But how was emotionally? How did you feel as you went through? Because you're obviously putting your body under a lot of stress, introducing a lot of new hormones at levels that are not traditionally normal day to day. How were you feeling throughout that process?
Yeah, I'll answer it in 2 parts, the physical and the emotional side. I will also say I did this in tangent of a new job, and while we were closing on a house, which I don't recommend anyone to do.
Got it done, though.
It's a lot of life stuff.
Yeah. I think we chose violence.
We did that. We did all this stuff under the guise of let's do this before we get busy, and in doing so, just got busier.
Yeah, it was a lot of bad decision making now that I look back, but it's okay. Physically, in those 2 weeks, the shots themselves don't actually hurt that much. Again, once you get past the mental hurdle, you're kind of okay, I'm just going to do this. There will obviously be some bruising in the abdomen area where you're giving yourself the shots. The first few days is fine. It's really, I think, for me personally, I started feeling the physical effects by day 4 to 5. And what that is, you're growing eggs. The whole point of these injections is to stimulate follicle growth. Gotcha. So you're essentially going to feel bigger, by day 6, I was like, I feel like a bloated chicken just walking around. Truly. You're kind of just constantly feeling like a lot of pressure in your stomach, walking around feeling like, I wasn't obviously pregnant, but I was like, this is like, you just feel like your weird sensations happening at all times. Emotionally, I would say I probably, again, didn't feel, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think I felt too emotionally different again until like week 2. And that's when I was like quite hormonal. I was very emotional. Things would set me off. People didn't agree with me. I'd get pretty upset.
I think you're being hard on yourself. Like the whole time you were
Am
like,
I?
Yeah, you're being hard on yourself.
Okay.
The whole time
Wasn't
you're
too
like,
crazy?
I'm terrible, I'm crazy. I'm like, no, you're just like turning into a human boba right now. And like you're not like you always just assume you are worse. And I would just like try to be there and be like, no, you're fine. Like it's okay.
Yeah. A human boba?
Yeah, you're growing follicles and they suck them out like a boba. So I understand it. It's part of life.
Yeah, no, that's a good description. I think they should remarket it to that. They should start a whole clinic and like make that the branding. That would be cute.
Just give a new meaning to
Contact me. I will help with branding.
Get free bubble tea with it.
Yeah. Justin did the day of my retrieval come home with bubble tea.
Aww.
Yeah. Not for me.
Oh.
Just, it was for
Just for
him.
jokes. Just for me.
It was for him. Yeah.
You're like, hey, it looks familiar, huh?
Yeah, I will say, because you're putting in so many hormones into your body, you will probably feel pretty emotional by the time not even by the time they do the retrieval, but the days before. I remember I was rewatching Emily in Paris, and there was a scene where I just started crying. I don't even think it was a sad scene, but it was because it was so touching to me.
The shitty acting.
It was probably the shitty acting or how bad the outfits were. So that was pretty bad. But by day 14 of the retrieval, I was just so ready for this process to be over.
Yeah.
And pretty excited by that point.
What was the hardest part of that 14-week process?
For me, it was not being able to probably move my body in the way that I'm used to. One thing that, again, anyone who's considering this process is you're really technically not allowed to work out for a month.
Oh, wow.
And as someone who, like, movement is medicine and all that, BS.
Damn, okay.
Not being able to do that definitely, I think, impacted my mental health even more than I'm willing to admit. And the reason why you're not able to do that is when you're growing these follicles, your ovaries also get a lot bigger because they're holding basically the follicles that they're going to retrieve. So you're really not allowed to twist your body in any ways because you're going to be at risk for something called ovarian torsion, which is a huge problem, which can completely negate this process, requires the ER. So obviously I didn't want to have that happen to me. So I was pretty cognizant about movement. So that definitely sucked. I think that was the hardest part.
So after the extraction process, like, what happens then? Like, you just get the results of like, yep, you have this many eggs frozen, or is it like a waiting period of like, oh, I'm eagerly waiting the results?
Yeah, good question. So also for context, what happens with retrieval is, I will say retrieval is probably one of the easiest things that happens in this process. I think it's like 15, 20 minutes. They bring you in and they give you anesthesia, so you go under. And then you wake up and the procedure's done. There is some residual soreness, but there's really no pain during the procedure at all. So that was nice. And to answer your question, they'll tell you right away at least they did for me, the total amount of eggs retrieved. However, what you do have to wait on is the total amount of eggs you retrieve isn't the amount they actually end up getting frozen. And if you're doing embryos, it's not the amount of embryos you'll have. So when you get the total amount of eggs, typically, I think it's 75 to 85% are then mature eggs. So if you're just freezing eggs, that will be your final like eggs frozen number. However, if you're doing embryos like we did, they'll then take a portion of the mature eggs, I think 70 to 80%, maybe even less, then become fertilized with sperm. And then you have to monitor those for around a week. And then around 50-ish% of those then become, I think what they call like day 5 embryos.
Like zygotes.
I don't know if it's zygotes or blastocysts or something. There's a term for that.
It's cool.
It's a cool word.
Yeah.
And what is
Blastocyst.
I like how you're doing shots and we're like, blast is a cool word.
Yeah.
That's where we're at.
I mean, it is a cool word. And then what is cool if you do embryos is you can do genetic testing on those actual embryos to see if they're genetically normal, and you can also get the gender, which we thought was really cool. So out of that final kind of day 5 embryo / blastocyst / Pokemon number, around 50%-ish, again, these are just ranges, are genetically normal. And those, I believe, are the ones that are frozen and then can then be used at a later time. So there is a severe drop-off.
It's a whole pipeline problem.
Yeah. It is.
All sorts of crazy stuff.
You want to start with as many eggs as humanly possible.
Yeah, that is ideal. You want to get as many as possible because there really is a drop-off with every single kind of procedure. And if you do just freeze your eggs, there's a drop-off then when you thaw them.
Oh, some might not.
Not all of them will survive that too.
Is it easier to thaw eggs or embryos?
I heard that it's actually easier to thaw embryos, that there's a higher survival rate with that.
Got that dog in them.
Correct. On that topic, do you want to share
what's your role
what
in all
the process is for you?
What were you doing in the room next door?
Yeah.
Being supportive, providing samples. I mean, I guess it's a weird experience for a guy. Obviously, it's nothing compared to what your partner goes through. But I think my MO was be supportive, and on retrieval day, show up. And when you show up, you need to provide a sample. And there's really only one good way to provide a sample, and that's the old-fashioned way. So, day of, I get called in first. The nurse takes me to this weird, just jerk-off room.
Which you're texting us a photo of.
Yeah, I sent y'all a photo. I mean, obviously you want to see what this room is. It's the least unsexy thing I've ever seen in my life. It's think of an old school doctor's chair with paper, doesn't recline, just sits straight up like a coach Spirit Airlines seat.
Nice.
There's a TV that's covered in plastic. There's a remote that's covered in plastic. I'm dumb, so I'm I gotta see what's on this TV. So turn on the TV, and lo and behold, tons of porn. So it's this weird porn room, and there's a whole code to how they get the sample. A nurse is here's a cup, there's some lube, here's some essential oils in here.
You need a hand.
Right, no, not that. Doing that at a fertility clinic would be wild. But she's okay, once it's done, once you do your business and it's done, don't come outside. Dial this number on the phone, the secret code that we know is done.
It's like a speakeasy.
A jizz speakeasy. And then she's once you dial the code, crack the door a little bit and just hold your hand out with the sample.
Oh.
So
Oh.
I did my business. Dial the code, and I'm peeking around this thing, and there's just a weird gloved hand that comes. Your hands touch, and you're oh shit, that's gone in the void now.
She said, "Don't come outside."
Yeah, she said, "Don't come outside." I got done.
Wait, serious question.
Yeah.
Is there a specific amount you need to provide?
I was wondering this. I was nervous because it's not the most calm room.
Sure.
It's a
You're
very
not at home.
It's not. It's you're playing a road game to show and go. There's no candles or anything.
But they give you essential oils. What do people?
But who's been using that?
Yeah, I would like to know.
I didn't sit down. There's loads everywhere in there.
Did you stand? You stayed standing.
Power stance.
Let's walk through how you.
I kind of
Did you troll in the corner?
cried in the corner. I love you.
Little walls.
No, it's weird because it's just I mean, you're making a sperm sample. You're realizing this could be a kid someday.
Yeah.
why is there a porn TV in this room? Like, it's just a weird, not sexy place. I was worried about, like, what if I get too nervous and it's like, it's not enough. Ended up being fine. I was Googling. I don't think that.
Googling what?
How much sperm you need to fertilize.
What did Google say, actually?
It was like, dog, you'll be okay. It's not a concern for.
I would just like to take the time to be like, the messaging that Google tells you is so different than the messaging Google tells me.
Well, no, the number, it was like in every like milliliter of sperm, there's like 100,000 sperm in there, and I was like, oh, okay, we're all right.
Those are the AI responses, though.
Yeah.
Those are the AI responses. You think it's someone's job to look at the specimen? It's just like counting. But yeah, I may have trolled Diane as she was going under her anesthesia. I was like, hey, I'm nervous to do mine.
Well, for context, that morning, bear in mind, I'm on day 14 of these hormones. I'm like fully feeling like just the most bloated person. And I was nervous that morning because I didn't get that Google response of like, any amount of eggs is great. My Google response is like, try to get as many as possible because the drop-off rate is so high. So I'm going in pretty nervous, and in that morning I was like, I'm like freaking out about this, and Justin was like, there's nothing to be nervous about. Like, there's absolutely nothing. We'll be fine. And then as I'm changing into the hospital gown, about to be put under, I get this text from him being like, I'm kind of nervous about my sperm donation. I was like, the audacity of this text.
I knew what I was doing.
No comment there.
You gotta. It's a serious thing. I had to add some levity to it. Mm-hmm. You didn't get the joke.
Nah.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so once there's the collection, the bobaing is finished and whatnot.
Punch the straw.
Like logistically, where do they stay? And what happens if you move? Do you carry them with you? Like, is there TSA? Like,
wear them around your necklace?
Yeah, but no, like actually, like, where do they put them, and how do you get them, and what happens if you don't ever use them?
That's a good question. I truly, because I was sleeping the whole time, or put under rather, I don't actually know if it's like a petri dish. I would imagine it's something like a petri dish that they then take and store. And I did see them like wheeling around dry ice everywhere in the clinic, so I imagine I don't think they freeze them right away, but I do think that they fertilize them that day, because the next day they were able to tell me this is the amount we were able to fertilize. I think from there they keep it in the lab. I don't know what happens in that week because they are under some sort of lab observation, but I do know once we got the final healthy embryo count, those are what are then frozen and put in storage. And if we don't use them, they just kind of stay in storage indefinitely.
That's one of the things you decide, like, if you don't use them, who takes ownership? I think it could be like the provider of the eggs is an option, or the actual clinic could own them. So something you or your partner would need to decide is like, if you do not use them, who do they legally belong to?
There is some like pretty dark questions of like, if something happens to your partner, who does it belong to? If something happens to both of you, who do you want to grant these eggs to? So you do have to answer that type of questionnaire in the beginning, and I imagine you have to answer a version of that if you're doing eggs. But yeah, they're being stored, and I will say from a cost perspective, storage is also typically, I think, $600 to $1,000 per year to just store these eggs. So that's another cost consideration to think about if you're doing this, because again, out of pocket, that is a lot of money.
Do you think you would have done this if you didn't have that benefit?
Ooh. I don't know. To be honest, as I mentioned, I recently just switched new companies this year, and honestly, one of the first questions I asked the recruiter when even taking the job was, do you guys have this fertility benefit? And they did, and I was like, this is a huge reason why I'm even taking this job. So I think I would have, probably, because it was so top of mind. but I don't know if I would have done it with this urgency. It is a huge benefit if your company offers this and this is something you're open to. I really recommend taking advantage because it's really such a huge cost lifted off your shoulders. So,
And
yeah.
how long do the eggs last?
Technically, is if they're stored for correctly, there shouldn't really be an expiration date on the eggs. However, as a female, I do think that though they tell you like you can kind of use them whenever, I believe that the chance of them like implanting correctly and you being able to kind of take them to a live birth is better, obviously, when you're younger. So I think there is a severe drop off of just having a live birth and that success rate going down when you do get an older stage of life. But technically the eggs themselves or the embryos themselves should be able to be stored indefinitely.
Does it feel like, what is the feeling now knowing that at least you have more choice in like your timeline, even though there's not like 100% guarantee of anything, like that you can kind of choose your family planning next step? Like, what is that feeling been like in your relationship as well?
I personally feel very empowered after doing this because to your point now, I think it's granted us not only timeline, but for me, like God forbid something does change in my fertility in the next few years, I know, hey, like this is an option we have, whether I use it personally or we have to get a surrogate. Like it feels very empowering knowing that we have some sort of insurance that sits outside of relying on my body to be healthy, which is a dark thing to say, but we're human. We don't know what's going to happen the next few years. So I definitely feel empowered. I feel grateful that we did this process and then we did get the results that we wanted in terms of numbers. But how do you feel like being as part of this? And you probably didn't think about it in depth when you were in your 20s, but now that you've taken part.
I think I agree. It's awesome to have the peace of mind knowing that we have a solid backup plan.
Yeah.
Like I think it's very, very different if we were in a scenario where like it was our 1A option.
Yeah.
We don't know if we're there yet. And I think for us, it was just like, let's make sure we have all of our bases covered because we are healthy right now and because we are relatively young. So I think it's really good knowing that it's really trippy knowing that there are embryos out there that are potentially future offspring. Like, I know it's crazy to think about.
In the state of Alabama, they actually are.
They're not in Alabama.
I know.
Shit. But I think it's also it's really, really cool to see your partner go through that process because like watching you was very, very inspiring because I would have been a baby if I was doing all of those shots. Like I probably would have been like, fuck this, I'm not gonna do this shit. So it was very, very cool to watch you do it. I'm a little confused. Like, let's say we had a kid naturally first, and then you use one of the embryos later. Like, who's the older kid?
The thing, can I just say the
Seriously,
things
like-
that you think about are so different than the things that I think about?
I mean, you gotta like,
Oh, that's so funny.
what's the answer?
That's a good question.
Like if we
I
had
don't
an
know.
older
Well, it's
girl
like-
to start, and she was like, "I'm older." He's like, "But I was fertilized first." I'm like,
Who wins the argument?
Yeah.
You know? Who gets the bigger room?
That's yeah. So in reality, when they're like older, they're technically like 30, but really they're like 40.
Oh, I didn't even think about
Maybe.
that. Oh, like they're,
Wow.
yeah.
What if they're like, on a
Like they've
leap
been
year?
alive for whatever.
What if you're born
Yeah.
on a leap year and you're...
Oh, and it was a leap year.
Yeah.
Wait, but that doesn't matter.
No.
Okay, yeah.
We did it on a leap year. They're going to be like 40 years old.
but no, it was really cool to watch that process. Obviously, it was like you want to be able to, when your partner is stressed or go like full of hormones, you want to be able to take that stress off them, but there's not much you really can do because like I don't have the equipment that you have, so I can't advise anything. It's just like you need to learn to just sit there and be supportive and like try your best to just give your partner some grace as they turn into a boba.
Yeah, I mean, in that sense, like this is so interesting just because I don't know, like we're fairly well educated, well read group, and like such a topic that we know nothing about, and like we're in our 30s, just like it's so easy to just not understand this entire side of life. And
Yeah.
I'm curious from that perspective, like what would you hope is either like taught more publicly or made more readily available from an education perspective, or what advice would you give couples or young women in their like 20s, like just to even start thinking about this? Yeah, what do you wish was more available?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so much. To the first part, what I wish was taught more, I think maybe it's a big ask to have this taught when you're like in high school, even though I think that's the ideal of educating people young, educating both the female and the male and like just the entirety of the audience so people know what their options are. Maybe more of like a medium term ask is just having maybe OBGYN doctors like telling females about these options when they're in their mid-20s. Like I think that would have been really helpful for me. And just having these conversations earlier versus like, oh, you're 30 now, like do this process. So that's probably to that end. And then advice, I think a few pieces. If you are, no matter what age you are, but especially if you are in your mid-20s, it's definitely not too early to look at this, because the fact of the matter is you're born with a finite amount of eggs, and the quality and the quantity is best when you're young. So there were girls that were 5 years younger than me in the clinic that probably didn't need to do it, but they were doing it to be proactive. And I think that is smart. Your body does bounce back from those hormones faster when you're younger. So if you have the chance to kind of evaluate this process in your 20s, do it. And if you have the luxury to do it. That being said, if you're in your 30s and 40s, I think it's also a good time if you haven't had kids yet, or if you want to plan for down the line. I don't think it's ever, I mean, I'm not a doctor. I don't think it's ever too late to vouch for what your options are, because you never know. So definitely empower yourself with looking into that. And then advice for people that are just going through it is tell your close girlfriends and your close friends that you're doing this process. One thing that I found to be extremely helpful was telling my girlfriends I was doing this, even those that didn't know anything about it, just to get that emotional support. It sounds kind of woo-woo and stupid and unnecessary, but having my girlfriends check in on me, especially my friends that had gone through the process, so many of them were like, make sure to ask this question, make sure to bring this to your doctor, take these supplements, it really helped me, make sure to not do this, like be aware of that. That was so hugely helpful, because the doctors did not go through that with me. So tell your inner circle, because like when you're hormonal and you're sad and you're on the couch crying about Emily in Paris, having your girlfriends just know what you're going through and checking in on you like made a really big difference for me.
I was there too.
Yeah, and you know.
And get adjusted in your
And
life.
get adjusted in your life. But not everyone has adjusted in their life. So yeah, tell your inner circle, and also advocate for yourself. I wish I did that I wish I did that more. I think that there were times where I could have pushed back with my clinic of like, you didn't tell me this side effect, or you didn't tell me these numbers. And I was just kind of Googling and using a lot of online research as kind of how I was getting most of this knowledge. I wish I had gone to the doctor and be like, no, you need to take the time to walk me through this process, explain to me these injections, what exactly is this, advocate for yourself. If you're feeling weird, if you have a side effect that you don't think should be tied to this, bring that up. Really advocate for yourself. And when you're evaluating clinics and you're going through this process, ask the tough questions up front instead of during the process when you can't switch clinics, because that can really help determine your experience. I had a friend go through this process 4 times.
Wow.
She went to multiple clinics and she had drastically different experiences. She didn't advocate for herself the first time, and she was able to the second time, which really changed not just her experience, actually changed the amount of eggs and embryos she got in the end. So talking about it up front, asking the questions, pushing back when you feel like is right can really dictate your end result. So do that. Yeah.
Love it.
Hell yeah.
It's my soapbox.
Well, I guess any questions for us? We always ask our guests. It doesn't seem the most fitting, but, you know.
I mean, I don't know. I guess as knowing this is men now, like, does this change your perspective on fertility? Like, you know, as someone with a long-term partner, like, is this a conversation that you guys ever have?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like, I don't know how much Angela's like had that conversation or thought about it or talked about it with her friends, but I know that hearing you and your friends talk about it made it feel more normalized for her. And so like we haven't talked about it seriously, I think, at this stage in our relationship, but I think it's something like just learning more about it. I'm like, oh, why wouldn't we look into this if long term we did want to have a family? You're in your late 20s, if you're in a place with great insurance, then like let's take advantage of that while it's on the table. And you know, like you said, like we're healthy, we have like coverage, it can be cost effective. So I mean, I think it's like it is eye-opening in the sense that like, oh wow, it's great to hear somebody who's gone through this and walked through all the stages. And I think there's like a lot of power in just demystifying it.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't even know where to start to think about this journey versus like, oh, here's like some concrete steps.
Yeah.
So,
I agree.
yeah.
I think that's a really important point too, because like when we were telling peers and like people of different generations about this process, different generations will have different ideas of what egg freezing is for and what it entails. So I would say like, as for anyone who's going through this process, like advocate for why you're doing it. Don't listen to other people, because most people don't understand why. And they don't, like, we ran into so many people who are like, why are you doing that? Why don't you just try to have a kid naturally? And we're like, that's not like, it's not like one or the other right now. Like, that's not why we're doing this. So, like, your reasons are your own. Stick to your guns.
Yeah.
And don't let people judge you.
Haters get to you.
Yeah.
I mean, like, not even haters. Just, like, don't let people who don't have the full context behind how it works govern or influence why you're doing this.
Yeah.
I'm really glad you said the part about normalization and then you said the generational piece, because two things, like this technology is still relatively new. And I think in regards to, you know, our parents' generation or, you know, generations above us, the fact of the matter is they were having kids younger. It wasn't a conversation that they had to have most of the time. If you're having kids in your early 20s, like you likely don't need to go through this process because you might be having your second, third kid even when you're like 26, 27. But for us, we were like, you know, we might want to have our first kid naturally, but like maybe our second kid, it would be helpful to have this. So normalize the conversation, because it's not the responsibility of the generation above us to normalize it, because they truly didn't have to go through it. So I offer like our parents' generation some grace when they were reluctant when we were sharing this. But yeah, I think normalizing it is helpful, and having conversations like this is helpful, because it is really daunting when you just hear the bullet point version of egg freezing is 2 weeks of shots that I have to give myself, like
Tens
hormones.
of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, tons of the barrier of entry is so high. And then when you start having conversations of like, okay, other women are going through it. Okay, there are payment plans that you can also do if your company doesn't have the insurance, like maybe that's an alternative solution. And just again, knowing like a lot of women are having this conversation, especially if you live in a big city too. We tend to have children later. Know that there are resources out there for you. And if no one else is going through this, call me, because I will walk you through this process and I will help anyone, and happy to just be a sounding board for like any person who's considering this.
Hell yeah.
You want us to put your phone number in the description?
No, but you can find me at LinkedIn. It's linkedin.com/Diane Lee Wong.
Oh my gosh. You had it
Please
ready.
shoot me an email. I'm not on Instagram right now, so don't DM me, but I am on LinkedIn.
Corporate diet.
That was the first time somebody's like plugged their socials.
Like the LinkedIn.
You can find me there. We can also talk about being an account executive.
Senior account executive.
Yes, senior account executive.
Wait, can I ask one last question?
Of course.
If you're willing to answer. Do you have a preference over boy or girl?
Oh, I prefer girl, but I think you prefer boy, right?
I think ideally one of each would be my preference. It's either one of each or 11 striking sons. So
to field the full team.
To field a full defense.
You're gonna use the entirety of your Monday stock to fund the surrogates that will have to carry.
It's not gonna go that far. No, I think a boy and a girl would be cool just because that's how I grew up. I think we would be good parents someday, but like I think it would be different if I was a boy dad or a girl dad.
Yeah. Do you guys feel like when you guys think about kids, is it always like reflective of your childhood? Because for me, I grew up as an only girl, so I'm like, I could have one girl and be great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I would think if I had
boys.
kids, I would want to have like 2 kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think two has always been just having like the sibling having a really strong sibling relationship with my sister. Like I would want that kind of thing for my children, even though like I grew up practically as an only child, right? Like,
yeah.
We had that similar. So it was like for a lot of my life, it was only child in essence, but I really value having that sibling relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Also seeing like having 2 nieces, I feel like I'm kind of like girl dad vibes because girls.
You would be the best girl dad.
Those are so cool. They're so chill. Boys are just terrors, man. They break everything.
Yeah.
They're just mad all the time.
Still mad.
So much anger.
You'd be a good girl dad.
Girls are like, what is Louis C.K. is canceled, but didn't he have the...
Oh, he's back now.
Is he back? Yeah. He was like, boys will like break your stuff. Girls will like break you emotionally forever.
Oh my God. And that makes you want to be a girl dad still?
No, I think I do.
So we said Chad's a girl dad. What's Shrey?
I can see Shrey being a really good boy dad. Because I feel like you have like the... Like, get your shit together. Like, do this. But I feel like you're nice about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about me?
I mean, I'm biased because I want a girl.
I think you need both. You need a counterbalance.
Well, they can't be best friends with their shadow. Like, you need to have the real person.
I'm an only child.
Yeah, you and your shadow at face high.
Me and my pet rock.
Yeah.
Did you ever collect rocks?
No.
I did. I was an only child.
Oh, shit.
I'm just saying.
I collect rocks.
Yeah.
I had an imaginary friend.
Yeah, right?
Really? How old were you?
25.
he's actually right here.
Yeah, he's been with us the whole time.
No, I didn't collect rocks. I had a lot of stuffed animals, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was your favorite stuffed animal?
A penguin.
Named?
Well, I had many. They're all named Pinky.
Pinky the penguin.
Yeah.
You also had 3 chickens.
Those were live.
Yeah.
Let it be known.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay.
I had 3 pet chickens because my parents didn't want to get like a dog or a cat.
Okay.
Which in retrospect is very weird because I grew up in suburban Seattle. So having 3 chickens was actually the worst decision. But they were named Marshmallow, Peepin' Jr.
Oh.
R.I.P.
Oh.
Yeah. But they were great. So I had friends. It was me and my 3 chicken siblings. Yeah. Birds. Man, maybe we shouldn't have an only child. We're a weird breed.
Well, on that note, Diane, thank you so much for joining. This was honestly a great conversation. We didn't know anything about this stuff. You've enlightened us all.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. Again, shout out you guys for talking about the hard-hitting topics. Female fertility.
Yeah, we're the real heroes.
You
here.
really are. Unsung heroes.
We have range.
Yeah.
Time to virtue signal.
Yeah.
Like crazy.
Happy International Women's Day.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I actually didn't realize it was until...
I didn't.
I actually found it on LinkedIn. Shout out LinkedIn. Okay.
Oh, God. Gross.
All right. Well, everyone, please follow us on Spotify, TikTok, Instagram, the whole gambit. And
Please bring PNT Network Studios podcast back.
bring it back, please.
What's
All
that?
right. Peace.
Kiss your homies goodnight.